When Sydney Sweeney spoke about respect, Keanu Reeves smiled with pride. The night began with quiet lights and a calm stage. The audience was filled with faces waiting for something meaningful, not just entertainment but words that could stay with them for years. The air was still, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for a spark. Sydney Sweeney sat at one side of the stage, her eyes focused and her voice ready. Beside her, Keanu Reeves sat in his usual calm manner, his presence quiet but powerful, the kind of presence that made people lean in without even realizing it. The host asked a question that at first seemed simple, but it cut deeper as soon as it was spoken. He said, "What is one value you believe the world is losing, and why does it matter to you?" The room went silent again, and then Sydney leaned forward, her hands shaking just a little, her heart racing faster than she wanted to admit. She said, "Respect. I believe respect is fading in many ways. People talk without listening. People judge without knowing. People step over others just to be seen higher. But respect is the root of kindness. It is the start of love. It is the ground for peace." Her words were not rushed. She spoke with pauses that were not too long, but long enough for the weight of each word to land. The audience shifted, some nodding, some lowering their eyes as if the truth of her words struck them personally. Respect was not something people spoke of often, but the way she framed it made it feel urgent, almost like a call to action. Keanu sat next to her, listening closely. His smile was not wide or dramatic. It was soft, steady, a smile of pride. He looked at her as though he was not just hearing words, but feeling the courage it took to say them in front of so many. The camera caught his face at that moment, and those watching could feel the emotion through the screen. It was not just a smile. It was pride mixed with gratitude, as though he saw in her the reflection of something he himself valued deeply. Then the moment shifted. The host leaned in, curious, and asked, "Sydney, you speak with such certainty. Was there a time when you felt disrespected, a time when this value was tested in your own life?" Her breath caught for a second, because to answer meant she would have to open a part of herself she usually kept guarded. But she decided to answer. Her voice grew quieter, more fragile, yet even more powerful. "Yes," she said. "There was a time when I was younger, when people thought my dreams were not worth anything. I was told my voice was too small. My place was not important. I felt invisible. But even then, one person showed me respect, and that gave me the strength to move forward." The room froze with the weight of her story. And then, without her expecting it, Keanu leaned toward the microphone. His voice was calm but strong, carrying the weight of his years. He said, "That is the truth of it. Respect is not about agreeing with someone. It is about seeing them. It is about letting them know they matter. Sydney is right. Without respect, even kindness loses its roots. And when someone feels seen, they find strength they did not know they had." The crowd broke into quiet applause, but it was not the kind of applause for show. It was the kind of applause that comes when people feel something in their chest, when they recognize the truth in their own lives. Some wiped tears, others nodded slowly. The moment was not about fame, not about careers, but about a human truth they all shared. Yet beneath this calm moment, there was a layer of tension. Not everyone in the room agreed. In the shadows sat people who felt threatened by such honesty, people who thrived on disrespect because it kept them in control. Their faces were hidden from the lights, but their silence was not the silence of reflection. It was the silence of planning. And though the audience did not know it, this night was only the beginning of a story that would test both Sydney and Keanu in ways they could not yet imagine. As the discussion moved forward, something had shifted in the energy of the room. People were no longer waiting to be entertained. They were waiting to feel more. The words of respect had planted a seed, but seeds, once planted, always invite both growth and storms. And so the story truly began, with a quiet smile of pride and with words that carried more weight than either of them could yet understand. The lights in the auditorium softened as the conversation continued, but the weight of Sydney's words lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. People whispered in the seats, not in boredom, but in reflection, repeating the word respect as if it had become a question they needed to answer for themselves. Yet beneath this thoughtful silence, an undercurrent of unease stirred. Hidden behind polite smiles and quiet claps were eyes that looked cold, eyes belonging to those who feared what such honesty could awaken. Sydney sat still after her words, her chest rising and falling slowly, as if her heart was still catching up with her courage. Keanu leaned a little toward her, his voice low but steady, almost like a whisper meant just for her. "You did well," he said. "Those words will stay with people. Don't underestimate that." She nodded, but her fingers tightened against each other. Deep inside, she wondered if she had revealed too much, if speaking about her struggles would somehow be seen as weakness. But then she caught Keanu's smile, that quiet pride in his eyes, and something inside her softened. The host, sensing the emotional depth, asked Keanu next. "Keanu, you have built a career admired not just for talent, but for humility. What do you think about respect in today's world?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that pulled everyone closer. Then Keanu answered, his tone calm but layered with history. "Respect," he said, "is the bridge that connects differences. I have seen fame, I have seen loss, I have seen silence. In every season, respect was the one thing that gave balance. When people respected me, I grew. When I respected others, I healed. But when respect was missing, everything broke, no matter how strong it looked on the outside." His words cut through the air like quiet thunder. People in the audience leaned forward, their eyes fixed on him. There was something about the way he spoke, without rush, without trying to impress, that made it feel real. It was not a speech. It was lived truth. And in that truth, there was both beauty and pain. But while the crowd felt inspired, something else was happening at the far edge of the stage. A man in a dark suit, part of the event organizers, whispered to another. Their faces looked tense, their eyes sharp. "We don't need this kind of talk spreading too far," one said under his breath. "It challenges too much." The other nodded quickly, his jaw tight. They had not expected the discussion to shift from light entertainment into something deeper, something that might stir hearts in ways that were harder to control. Back on stage, Sydney felt the energy change. She could not see the whispers, but she sensed the weight of eyes that did not hold kindness. She swallowed, her throat dry, and forced a small smile as the audience clapped again. Yet in her chest there was a tremor, the kind that comes when you realize not everyone in the room wishes you well. During the short break, Keanu leaned closer. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked softly. She nodded, not even trying to hide it. "Yes. It feels like someone is waiting for me to stumble." Keanu's eyes stayed on her, serious but gentle. "Then don't stumble," he said. "Not for them. Speak the truth, and if it shakes them, let it. That is their fear, not your failure." His words gave her strength, but strength always carries weight. As the break ended and the conversation returned, the host opened questions to the audience. A young woman stood up, her hands shaking, her eyes filled with tears. "Sydney," she said, "how do you keep going when people don't respect you, when they try to make you feel small?" The room hushed. All eyes turned toward Sydney. She drew in a deep breath, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I remind myself that their words do not define me. Respect is not always given to us. Sometimes we must carry it inside. even when no one else gives it. If we respect ourselves, if we hold that close, then we cannot be made small. They can try, but they cannot succeed. The woman in the crowd broke into tears, and others clapped, some even standing. It was more than applause, it was release, as if people were carrying the same wounds and had finally been given permission to heal. And yet, in the shadows, the men in suits exchanged another look. One muttered, "We need to control this. If people leave here thinking they are stronger than we allow them to believe, it will spread beyond this room." Their tone was cold, sharp, filled with something darker than simple disagreement. Keanu noticed them now. His eyes caught their restless movements, their forced smiles. His face remained calm, but inside he knew this story was about to go beyond words on a stage. Respect was powerful, but power always invites resistance. As the session ended, Sydney felt a strange mix of relief and unease. She had spoken her truth, and she had touched hearts, but she could not shake the feeling that something was waiting for her beyond the doors of the auditorium. Keanu walked beside her as they left the stage. His voice was quiet, almost like a father speaking to a daughter. "You spoke with courage. Hold on to that, because courage always has a cost, but it is worth it." She looked at him, her eyes wide, her heart beating fast. "And if the cost is too high?" she whispered. Keanu smiled, the same quiet smile as before, but now heavier, almost sad. "Then we pay it together." The night ended with applause, but the silence that followed carried more weight than the sound itself. Outside, the world waited, and with it, challenges neither of them could yet name. The night after the event should have been calm. Sydney sat by the window of her hotel room, the city lights glowing like restless stars below. She should have felt proud, even relieved. Her words had reached people. She had seen tears, applause, and hope in their eyes. But instead of peace, there was a storm in her chest. She replayed her speech again and again, asking herself if she had gone too far, if speaking of her own pain would make her look weak, or if those silent faces she had noticed in the crowd had marked her in some way. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "Be careful with your words. Some truths are not welcome everywhere." She froze, staring at the message until her hands shook. The letters were small, but the threat inside them felt heavy. For a moment, she thought of ignoring it, but fear has a way of wrapping around the heart and making it hard to breathe. Just then, there was a knock at her door. Her heart jumped, and for a second she almost didn't move. Then she heard the gentle voice she recognized. "It's me," Keanu said from the other side. She opened the door quickly, relief washing over her face. He stepped inside, calm as always, but his eyes noticed her trembling hands. "What happened?" he asked softly. She handed him the phone. He read the message, his jaw tightening. He didn't show anger, but his silence spoke louder than shouting ever could. Finally, he placed the phone down on the table and looked at her. "Fear is what they want you to feel. Don't give it to them," he said. "But what if they try to stop me?" she whispered. "Then you keep speaking," he answered. "And I will stand with you." There was something in his tone, firm but kind, that gave her the strength she thought she had lost. Still, deep inside, she knew this was not a simple warning. It was the beginning of something heavier, something that would test both of them more than they had planned. The next morning, they walked together into a follow-up meeting with the event organizers. The men in dark suits were there, the same ones who had whispered in the shadows. Their smiles were too wide, their words too polished. "We appreciate the passion you both showed last night," one of them said, "but we'd like to ask that in future talks, you keep the message lighter. People come for inspiration, not to be reminded of struggles or resistance." Sydney felt her chest tighten, but before she could reply, Keanu spoke. His tone was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "People come for truth. If you ask us to trade honesty for comfort, then you are not asking for inspiration. You are asking for silence." The room went quiet. The men in suits shifted uncomfortably, their smiles fading for a second before returning. "We only want balance," one of them said. But the chill in his eyes betrayed his words. After the meeting, Sydney walked beside Keanu, her thoughts racing. "You spoke so strongly," she said, almost in awe. "Weren't you afraid of what they might do?" Keanu shook his head gently. "I have lived long enough to know that silence is more dangerous than speaking. When we hide truth, we lose ourselves." His words stayed with her, echoing louder than the warning message on her phone. But the tension around them was growing. Later that day, during a lunch interview, a reporter asked Sydney a sharp question. "Do you really think respect can change anything? Or is it just another pretty word people use on stage?" She felt the sting of the question, but she looked into the camera and spoke with steady breath. "Respect is not just a word. It is action. It is the choice to listen when you don't want to, the choice to lift someone instead of push them down. It is the smallest thing, but it changes the biggest things. I believe it because I lived it. Respect saved me when nothing else did." Keanu, sitting beside her, smiled again, the same smile of pride, quiet but deep, the kind of smile that gave her courage even under pressure. But outside the camera lights, the men in suits were watching. One leaned to the other. "She is not slowing down," he said darkly. "And with him standing beside her, people will listen even more. We need to find a way to remind them that voices like theirs are not easy to carry." The storm was building, even if Sydney and Keanu could not yet see its full size. But for the first time in her life, Sydney did not feel alone in facing it. She felt Keanu's presence beside her like a shield, not to fight her battles for her, but to remind her she had the strength to fight them herself. That night, as they left the studio, a soft rain began to fall. Sydney lifted her face toward the sky, the drops cool against her skin. Keanu walked beside her, quiet as always, but his silence carried comfort. "You think we can really change anything?" she asked softly, her voice almost lost in the rain. He looked at her, his eyes kind, his smile faint but sure. "Change begins with one person daring to speak. You spoke. Others will hear. That is how it begins." And though the rain fell heavy, inside her chest something burned bright. The rain from the night before left the city streets shining like glass. Early morning light stretched across the skyline, calm on the outside but hiding the quiet tension growing beneath. Sydney woke with heavy thoughts. The message on her phone still lingered in her mind, and the faces of the men in suits haunted her memory. She wanted to believe her words had done nothing more than inspire, but deep down she knew they had also provoked something else, something darker. She sat at the table with a notebook open in front of her, trying to write down her thoughts. Every line began with strength, but every line ended in doubt. Respect was a powerful idea, but what if the world was too cruel to care? What if she was too small for this fight? She closed the notebook, her hands pressing hard against the cover, almost as if trying to lock her doubts away. Just then her phone rang. Keanu's name lit the screen. She answered quickly, her voice softer than usual. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he replied, his tone steady, grounding. "Are you ready for today?" She sighed. "I don't know if I am. I feel like eyes are watching, waiting for me to fall." Keanu's voice grew firmer. "Then let them watch. Because what they will see is someone who refuses to fall. Remember, courage does not mean the fear goes away. It means you move even when it stays." His words filled the silence in her room with warmth. She found herself breathing easier. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that day, they arrived at a small community hall where a private gathering had been arranged. It was not filled with famous names or cameras. It was filled with ordinary people, teachers, workers, parents, students, the kind of people who rarely had their voices heard. They had come not just to see actors, but to listen to stories that might remind them of their own strength. Sydney looked out at the faces. They were tired faces, faces that carried struggles too heavy to hide. When she stepped onto the small stage, her heart beat fast, but she began anyway. "Last night I spoke about respect," she said. "Today I want to tell you something more personal. When I was younger, I was told my dreams were too big for someone like me. I was told to stay quiet, but someone respected me enough to listen. And that made all the difference. I stand here now because of that moment. Respect gave me courage." Her words drew a stillness over the room. Then a woman in the back stood, her hands rough from labor, her eyes filled with quiet pain. "My son," she said, her voice trembling. "He feels invisible. He works hard, but no one sees him. What do I tell him?" Sydney's throat tightened, but she found her answer. "Tell him he matters. Tell him respect begins inside, even when others cannot see it. Tell him his worth does not shrink because others ignore it. Sometimes we must carry our own respect until the world learns to give it." The woman nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. And in that moment, the weight in the room shifted. People leaned forward as though her words had unlocked something in their hearts. Keanu, who had been watching quietly, finally stepped forward. His presence alone drew silence. "I have seen much in my life," he said gently. "I have seen loss, and I have seen kindness. One thing I learned is this: when respect is missing, it is easy to lose yourself. But when one person gives respect, even in small ways, it creates strength where there was none. Don't underestimate the power you have to change someone's life simply by seeing them." The hall filled with applause, soft at first, then growing. It was not applause for celebrities, but for the truth they both carried. But outside the hall, the men in suits waited in a dark car, watching through tinted windows. One of them spoke into a phone. "They're spreading their message faster than we thought. This is not just about a stage anymore. People are listening." A voice on the other end replied coldly, "Then we will remind them what happens when voices rise too high." Back inside, Sydney felt a sudden chill, though the room was warm. She could not explain it, but something inside whispered that the path ahead was not only inspiring, it was dangerous. Later, as she and Keanu walked out, she spoke softly. "Did you see the way people listened? It felt like they were hearing not me, but something they already carried inside." Keanu nodded, a small smile on his lips. "That is the power of respect. It wakes what is already there. You gave them permission to believe again." She looked at him with gratitude, but her heart still carried the shadow of unease. "What if they try to stop us?" she asked. His answer was simple, but it carried a strength that anchored her. "Then we keep going. Because respect is not just a word, it is a fight worth every risk." As they walked into the evening light, the city looked calm, but both of them knew the calm would not last. A storm was coming, and they would have to face it together. The following day began with a strange heaviness in the air. Sydney woke early, unable to rest. The words she had shared with the people in the community hall kept circling in her head, but so did the sight of the men in suits, the way they watched like shadows that refused to leave. She tried to shake it off, telling herself she was imagining it, but the feeling stayed. As she prepared to leave for another event, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. Her hands shook as she picked it up, her name scrawled across the front with sharp strokes. Inside, a single piece of paper carried the words, "Your respect will not save you. Stop speaking before it's too late." Her breath caught in her throat. It was not just a warning now, it was a threat. She immediately called Keanu. Within minutes, he was at her door, his calm presence filling the room. She handed him the note, her eyes wide with fear. He read it slowly, then looked at her with steady eyes. "They want you silent. That means your voice is working." "But what if they hurt me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. He placed the note down carefully and spoke in a quiet tone that carried more power than any shout. "Then I will stand beside you. Respect has always been dangerous to those who live on disrespect. But we cannot back down. If we stop, they win." His words gave her strength, though fear still pulsed in her veins. Together they left for the day's event, which was smaller but filled with people hungry for hope. This time, the hall was crowded with young students. Their faces glowed with eagerness, but their eyes also carried questions, the kind of questions young hearts hold when they feel lost in a world that does not always see them. Sydney stood in front of them, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger as she spoke. "Respect is not about age or fame or power. It is about seeing each other. When I was your age, I felt invisible. But someone respected me, and it gave me the courage to keep going. You can do the same for each other. Never think your kindness is too small. It may be the very thing someone needs to survive." The students leaned in, listening with wide eyes. One boy raised his hand. His voice cracked with emotion as he asked, "What if no one respects me, no matter what I do?" Sydney's chest tightened. She walked closer to him, her eyes kind. "Then you start by respecting yourself. You stand tall even if no one claps. You carry your worth even if no one says you have it. Because respect begins inside. When you know your value, the world cannot take it from you." The boy lowered his eyes, and a tear slipped down his cheek. But there was something brighter in his face now, like a flame had been lit. As the crowd clapped, Keanu stepped forward. His voice was deep and calm, carrying the weight of his years. "I have seen people lose everything, but still walk with dignity because they respected themselves. And I have seen people who had power but no respect, and they were empty. Don't chase applause, don't chase control. Chase respect, and you will always stand strong." The students erupted into applause, not forced but alive. The sound filled the room with energy, but once again, in the shadows, danger lingered. Outside, the same dark car sat waiting. The men in suits watched, their faces colder than before. One spoke sharply into his phone. "She is not stopping. She grows louder with every speech. We cannot allow this to spread." The voice on the other end replied with chilling calmness. "Then it is time to silence them both." Back inside, Sydney felt a sudden shiver. She could not see the car, but her heart sensed the threat pressing closer. When the event ended, she walked with Keanu to the car, waiting for them. As they drove away, she finally spoke, her voice soft but heavy. "Why does it feel like every step we take forward, the shadows grow darker?" Keanu looked out the window, his expression serious. "Because truth always draws enemies, but it also draws allies. Remember that. You are not alone." Her eyes searched his face, and in his calm strength, she found a piece of courage she thought she had lost. But even with his reassurance, she knew the road ahead was narrowing, and the test of her words was only just beginning. That night, as she lay in bed, the city outside buzzed with its usual life. But for her, sleep did not come easily. Every sound felt louder, every shadow longer. She wondered if speaking about respect was worth the risk, if she was strong enough to carry it further. Yet deep inside, she remembered the faces of the boy, the woman, the crowd. She remembered the way their eyes lit when she spoke, and she whispered to herself in the dark, "I cannot stop." Across the city, Keanu sat alone, his own thoughts heavy. He knew what was coming. He had seen enough of the world to recognize the signs. But he also knew this: some fights are worth the pain. And he had chosen to stand beside Sydney, no matter how dangerous the path became. The next day carried an air of tension so thick that even the light of the sun seemed dimmer. Sydney walked into the studio for another interview, but her heart beat heavy in her chest. She kept replaying the note in her mind, those words etched like fire. Your respect will not save you. She wanted to believe they were just threats, but something inside told her the danger was very real. Keanu was already there, waiting. When she entered, his calm gaze met hers. He didn't need to ask if she was afraid. He already knew. "Stay close to me today," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, remember you are not standing alone." The interview began with lights and cameras, the kind of brightness that should have made everything feel safe. But even under the glow, Sydney could see the shadows beyond the stage. The questions started easy, about her career, her projects, her journey. Then one host leaned forward, his tone sharper. "Sydney, some people say your words about respect are too idealistic, that they don't match the harshness of the real world. What do you say to that?" Her throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. "I say the world is already harsh because people have stopped respecting each other. If we choose kindness, if we choose to see each other, it doesn't make us weak. It makes us stronger. Respect is not a dream, it is a choice." Her voice rang with sincerity, and the audience in the studio clapped softly. Keanu glanced at her with that same quiet pride, the smile that seemed to tell her she had spoken the truth once again. But just as the applause faded, the lights in the studio flickered. A low hum echoed through the room. For a moment, everyone froze. Then the power returned, the lights glowing steady again. People laughed nervously, brushing it off as technical trouble. But Keanu's eyes narrowed. He looked toward the back, where he noticed two unfamiliar men standing, watching too intently, not clapping, not smiling. After the interview, as they prepared to leave, Keanu leaned close to Sydney. "We need to be careful. They are watching more closely now." Sydney swallowed hard. "Why us? We are only speaking about respect. Why is that so dangerous?" Keanu's tone was steady, but his words carried weight. "Because respect takes power away from those who thrive on disrespect. If people start believing in themselves, those who control through fear lose their grip. That is why they see you as a threat." The truth hit her harder than the threat itself. She realized this was not just about speeches anymore. It was about changing lives, and some people feared that change. That night, a private dinner was arranged for both of them. It was meant to be a quiet moment, away from cameras, with only a few trusted people in attendance. The restaurant was dimly lit, the sound of soft music playing. For a while, it felt calm. They laughed lightly, shared small stories, even allowed themselves to feel normal. But then, halfway through the meal, a waiter set down a folded note beside Sydney's plate. Her heart sank as she opened it. The words were sharp, written in the same hand as the earlier warning. "Last chance. Stay silent, or you will regret it." Her hand shook. Keanu reached over, taking the note from her fingers. He read it, then tore it in half without hesitation. "They want you afraid," he said, his voice firm. "But fear is not respect. You will not give it to them." Sydney stared at him, her eyes wet. "I don't know if I am as strong as you think I am." Keanu leaned closer, his voice soft but unbreakable. "Strength is not never feeling fear. Strength is speaking anyway. And you have already done that." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded slowly. His words were like anchors, keeping her steady in the storm. As they left the restaurant, the air outside was cold. The dark car appeared again across the street, headlights glowing like eyes. Keanu saw it, his hand gently guiding Sydney closer to him. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough to keep her moving forward. In that silence, as they walked side by side, Sydney finally understood. Respect was not just a word, not just an idea. It was resistance. It was defiance against fear. And that was why it carried both light and danger. Back at her hotel, she stood by the window, looking at the city lights far below. She thought of all the faces she had seen in the audience. The boy, the woman, the students. Their eyes had carried hope because of her words. She whispered to herself, "I cannot stop now, even if it costs me." In the room next door, Keanu sat alone, his gaze fixed on the note he had kept from the restaurant before tearing it. He knew the threats would only grow, but he also knew something deeper. Moments like this shaped history, and he had already decided he would protect her voice at all costs. The final day of the event arrived, and the city buzzed with anticipation. People from across the country had gathered, not just to hear about films or careers, but to listen to words that had already begun to change the way they thought about themselves. For Sydney, the morning felt heavier than any before. She stood by the mirror, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breath. This was supposed to be the proudest moment of her life, but it felt like the most dangerous. She remembered the notes, the warnings, the men in suits who watched with eyes like stone. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave quietly and let the storm pass. But then she remembered the boy who had asked her if respect could exist when no one gave it. She remembered the woman who had wanted hope for her son. She remembered the tears, the applause, the way people leaned forward as if holding on to every word. And most of all, she remembered Keanu's smile, the smile of quiet pride that told her she was doing something that mattered. When she entered the auditorium, the sound of voices filled the air. The hall was larger than before, crowded with people. Cameras lined the walls, ready to broadcast her words to millions. Keanu walked beside her, calm as always, but she could see the weight in his eyes. He knew as well as she did that this day would decide more than just a speech. The host welcomed them on stage. Applause filled the room, but beneath the clapping there was a tension. An invisible line stretched tight. Sydney stepped up to the microphone. Her heart pounded, her throat dry, but she forced herself to speak. "Today," she began, her voice trembling but clear, "I want to tell you why I believe respect matters more now than ever. We live in a world where people are quick to judge, quick to tear each other down. But respect is not weakness. It is strength. It is the courage to see someone else, to give them dignity, even when the world does not. Respect gave me the strength to stand here, and it can give you the strength to stand anywhere." The audience grew still, every ear listening. Her voice gained strength as she continued. "I know some people don't want these words spoken. I know some want me to stay silent. But I cannot. Because silence helps no one. Respect is not just a dream, it is survival. It is hope. And it belongs to all of us." The hall erupted in applause, louder than anything before. People stood, clapping, cheering, their eyes wet with tears. The cameras captured every face, every spark of emotion. And at her side, Keanu smiled again. That same smile of pride, deeper now, as if he knew she had stepped fully into the strength she once doubted. But in the shadows, the men in suits moved. One stood, his eyes cold, his body tense. For a moment, it seemed like the storm was about to break in violence. But then something unexpected happened. People in the audience began chanting softly, their voices rising. "Respect, respect, respect." The word spread, growing louder until the entire hall thundered with it. The men froze. They realized the truth. They were outnumbered. Respect was no longer just Sydney's voice or Keanu's calm presence. It was now the voice of hundreds, and soon It would be the voice of thousands more, watching beyond the walls. Sydney looked out at the crowd, tears filling her eyes. She turned to Keanu, her voice breaking. "They heard me!" He nodded slowly, his smile gentle, filled with pride. They did. And once people hear the truth, it cannot be taken back. The men in suits left quietly, their power drowned by the voices of the people. The storm they had tried to summon faded into the background. When the event ended, Sydney and Keanu stepped outside together. The sky was clear now, the rain long gone. The city lights glowed softly, not as threats but as reminders of hope. She looked at Keanu, her voice soft. "I was afraid I wasn't strong enough." He shook his head, his eyes kind. "Strength is not never being afraid. Strength is what you just did. You spoke anyway. That is what changes the world." Her lips curved into a quiet smile, her heart finally steady. "Then I will never stop speaking." Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder, the pride in his smile shining brighter than the city behind them. "And I will never stop standing with you." The story did not end with applause. It ended with a promise. Respect had begun as a word, but it had grown into a movement, one that could not be silenced. And though the road ahead would still carry storms, Sydney knew she was no longer walking it alone.